Welcome to What Matters Now, the Times of Israel's weekly podcast, diving into one issue facing Israel and the Jewish world right now. I'm Deputy Editor Amanda Borschel-Dan, today here with Tuvia Book, who is part of the Palmar, Asaf Medical Extraction Unit. Tuvia, thank you so much for joining me today in our Jerusalem offices.
It's a pleasure.
Just this week, some stats came out from the medical corps, and it was reported that about 5,300 wounded soldiers have been treated amid the ground offensive in the Gaza Strip, and another 700 in Lebanon. Just for some comparison's sake, during the entire 2006 Second Lebanon War, 833 soldiers were treated, and in the 2014 Gaza War, 709 soldiers were treated. So that's 5,300 in Gaza so far, and another 700 in Lebanon. Now, the case fatality rate, the CFR, is the proportion of wounded who end up dying, and it's really significantly decreased compared to past wars, with the medical corps reporting that it stands at about 6.9% in Gaza and 7.1% in Lebanon. Again, for comparison's sake, the Second Lebanon War saw a CFR of 14.8%, and the 2014 Gaza War saw 9.2%. That's really remarkable in its reduction. So a lot of it is attributed to better and faster treatment for wounded soldiers, including the use of whole blood transfusions on the battlefield for the first time, and some 300 soldiers have been given such transfusions so far. Now, Tuvia is here, and he's going to talk to us about this and other things, such as the speed in which soldiers are treated and how quickly they reach hospitals after our break. So Tuvia, again, thanks for joining me. And on average, according to what we heard from the medical corps, senior medics are able to reach wounded soldiers within under 4 minutes during the current fighting. And that's compared to 20 to 25 minutes on average in the Second Lebanon War. You, I think, would be one of these senior medics, or at least your unit. Tell us how this change took place. How is it that you can so quickly reach these soldiers?
Okay, well, I'm also one of the few medical staff that can compare and contrast between the Second Lebanon War and the current conflict we have right now with Hamas in Gaza and also in the north in Lebanon. I was served as a combat medical in the 2006 Second Lebanon War. And the big difference right now is speed. What we have embedded medics with the field units. So one has a field unit such as a Givati or Golani unit inside the Gaza Strip, they have their combat medics. But in addition, there's also much more senior medical staff, paramedics and military doctors who are inside the conflict zone. So on average, within 4 minutes, they're getting treatment, which is critical, especially if, for example, there is a bleeding, arterial bleeding. If that's not treated immediately, it doesn't matter what else you do, that casualty will not make it, will become a fatality. So you need to have immediate treatment. But the real lifesaver is the absolute incredible professionalism and speed of the evacuation. People didn't think it was possible. I'm talking about other militaries around the world who've come to observe what we're doing on the medical front, to evacuate a soldier from the moment they're wounded until they're in the OR of a hospital in less than an hour. It's the golden hour. It was once considered to be an absolute impossibility. Just like before 1954, people didn't think you could run a sub-4-minute mile, and then along came Roger Bannister. So in this current conflict, we've got that down. So, for example, when a soldier is wounded inside the conflict zone, our unit, which is a bit of a mouthful, it's called a Palmar in Hebrew, which is Plugat Lechima Mirchavit Rufuit, which basically means a combat medical extraction unit. We get called straight away. And there's a lot of technology here that's being used for the first time, both technology from a medical point of view and also some of the medical procedures as well. One you mentioned before is until this conflict, we're using a plasma substitute. Now we're using real blood. We actually have O-negative universal donor blood, which is climate controlled and comes with us to battle. And it really helps the healing in a much faster pace. And we have every combat medical unit doing extraction has actual real blood in the field with it. In addition to some of the technology we have ultrasound scanners that are portable. So we can actually scan the wounded soldier for internal bleeding in the field itself, which is a game changer. And finally, another piece of technology we have to use on the soldiers, we have laryngoscopes with cameras that can be inserted down the airway to see exactly where the blockage is. Again, in the field, this is before they're even evacuated, if there's obstructed airways. All of this is being recorded on what looks to the untrained eye like an iPad, but there's a very, very advanced piece of medical technology called a Tofes 101, a 101 form, literally, but there's no paper and there's no pens. One of the medical staff is digitally recording the treatment as it's happening in real time. And these statistics are getting beamed to their helicopter coming in if it's critically wounded soldier, and the same statistics are getting beamed from the helicopter to the final hospital of destination. So the treatment is fluid from the moment the soldier is wounded until they actually arrive and they're being treated the whole way. So to put this in layman's terms, one of the most infamous incidents that happened with an accident of a famous person was when Princess Diana was involved in a car accident in Paris in the tunnel. If that would have happened in Israel, even in the Gaza Strip or Lebanon, she would have been saved. Because what actually happened then is she was wounded, she had internal bleeding, and it wasn't treated until she arrived in the hospital, which then was too late, and she was even conscious. So what happens is the treatment starts straight away, and that's what makes a difference. That's why those fatality rates are dropping. In fact, there's instantaneous treatment, A. B, there's incredible professional medical personnel. C, there's incredible medical technology. And D, probably most importantly, is the speed of the evacuation whilst being treated the entire way.
And everyone is on the same page, even though there is no page. Tuvia, can you just tell me a couple cases that you've worked on just to give us a sense of the work that you actually do in the field? For example, anyone that we would have heard of, of the hostages, for example.
Okay, so we were the medical backup team for the last 4 hostages, Noah and the 3 guys that were found, and it was super emotional. Just first of all, the sheer amount of forces that were involved at Shabbat, Air Force, ground forces, Navy, even just to be part of it. I can tell you that after the rescue after they were successfully taken out of the field, there was people openly were emotional in our unit, and we've seen a lot of crazy stuff. People hugging each other and crying, just the sheer relief, because that really is what we're trying to do day in and day out. We see these protests around and posters around, bring them home. We're trying 24/7. We're trying desperately to find our hostages. And there was such an emotional relief when we actually were part of a successful operation to extract them, that it really, really showed itself. As far as famous cases, the person we rescued is probably the most well-known soldier who was serving. We didn't actually know who it was at the time. And that, of course, is this January of this year was Idan Ahmedi, the Fauda star and also the music star. So very famously, when the war started, he actually went to serve in reserves. He's one of the 150% that showed up, and he was in a combat engineer movement under Sakravit in his unit. And despite the fact that he was 35 and married with 2 kids, many reservists are married with kids and jobs, and his fame, he said, no, at the end of the day, I'm an Israeli citizen. I've served in a combat unit. I'm an important unit, a combat engineer, and I'm going back to that unit. So we were called in January for a mass casualty event. And when we got there, there was a lot of wounded, and he was one of them, but we didn't know who it was because the force of the blast had literally ripped all his ID off. His face was black, and in any other military in the world, he would have been left for dead. He was not breathing, he was not conscious, and there were unfortunately casualties there as well. We have a couple of guys in our unit, that's their job, is to identify and bring back to an honorable burial the heroes who fall in action. But one of the doctors in our unit, she felt a slight flutter of a pulse, And we were all over him, and we opened up the airway. He actually got real blood in the film we talked about earlier as well. He got a real blood transfusion. And when the helicopter landed, he was not stable, and we couldn't move him even. And so it took off, and the second helicopter came in. They'd sent in 2 helicopters. The backup helicopters couldn't take it. And eventually, when he was stable enough, the only helicopter in that area actually belonged to the deputy chief of staff. He sent his personal helicopter in, and he was the only patient we loaded on. Now, we didn't load him on because it was famous actor and movie and music star. We didn't even know who he was, so we just put on 25 years old anonymous, because we guessed his age. We didn't know who it was. And when he loaded, he was still unconscious, but we actually got the airway open and breathing, manually breathing. And in other words, someone standing next to him with an ambo suction, putting air into his lungs, but he was just about stable enough to move. And he was already in Sheba Hospital a couple of minutes later, already being fully treated. And miraculously, everyone's seen the famous press conference where he comes out with his arm in a sling. A few weeks later, he was fine. And the story of his rescue is just one of many stories. We have literally taken out hundreds and hundreds of soldiers by helicopter. Without that speedy evacuation, they would not be here today. Many months later, I was in New York and actually got to meet with 2 of the founder writer, Avi Sakharov and Lior Raz, who wanted to hear the behind-the-scenes details of this particular evacuation of their friend and colleague.
I love that your touchstone of popular culture was Princess Diana, and that perhaps leads me to ask about your personal life. You obviously have an accent. It doesn't sound purely British to me. Neither do I have a pure American accent. So where is your mutt-like accent from, Tuvia?
Most definitely not the Bronx. It's a bit of a combination. I was a wandering Jew as a child. I never had a name growing up. I was just called the rabbi's son. And they wrote a song about me. It's called The Son of a Preacher Man. However, I did grow up both in the UK and South Africa, but my accent's not quite either one. I don't talk the South African accent, but I don't quite speak the King's English.
Excellent. And you came to Israel alone. We kind of swapped stories before we started recording, and you were like me. You came alone, but unlike me, you joined the army. So you were a lone soldier, which is what we call people who either are religious or ultra-Orthodox and who are kicked out from their families when they join the army and need a shelter or a foster family, as it were, during their military service, or people who have families, warm families, I'm sure yours was as well, proud families, but they're not in Israel. So when you were a lone soldier, what unit did you serve in?
So I served in the best unit in the IDF, called Givati. They're the ones with the purple berets. In Hebrew, we call it Chativat HaSkula, or the chosen unit, which is also a pun on the word segol for purple. And basically, it's a combat infantry marine unit. Now, I was a Chayal Boded, but that wasn't my initial intention. I came from the lovely rainy Wales, where I was finished high school, and the plan was to come for a gap year to Israel with my youth movement. I grew up in a Zionist youth movement called Bnei Akiva, which is a modern Orthodox Zionist youth movement. I was already accepted to university in London, to UCL, to University College London. Like many of my peers, it was standard practice to take a gap year in Israel. What changed the course of my life and resulted with me taking the road less traveled was just meeting Israeli peers. That really changed, because when we were obsessed in high school about going to tertiary education, to university, and that's what we talked about, besides other things teens talk about. And then when I came here, I met these Israeli peers who looked the same and played the same sports and dressed the same and heard the same music, but obviously their obsession was national service and giving, and there was something which I had not grown up with, and so changed my thought process during my gap year, and resulted, as you mentioned, with me volunteering to serve in the military, despite not having to. I did not have Israeli parents or an Israeli passport, but I felt that the ivory tower of academia would always be there. And this is my chance to give back to our country, based on 2 reasons. A, the Zionist youth movement and education, and B, my mother's family was entirely, was absolutely devastated by the Shoah. And she literally grew up with a mother and a father, an aunt, and 2 brothers and a sister. That was her whole family on the planet Earth, because everyone else had been killed, murdered, because Israel came around 10 years too late. So growing up in the shadow of the Holocaust and the Zionism, I might have been preloaded before I came on the gap year, but that was the result. I did end up staying and did up being a lone soldier in Givati, And I was adopted on a kibbutz, which has very much been in the news, called Kibbutz Saad, which is one of the kibbutz on the Gaza periphery.
But what year are we talking about that you actually came on Aliyah?
We're talking about the Neolithic period. So I came, helped drain the swamps from the second Aliyah back in 1904. No, I came in the late 1980s. So Israel still had a security zone in Lebanon. Ironically, we're still in Lebanon now in that same area. But in the late 1980s, I made Aliyah.
So if I'm doing math properly, that means you are basically way too old to be doing what you're doing day to day right now.
Physically, yes, but not mentally. Correct. In the IDF, the joke is when you finish your actual mandatory services, that's when the army really begins, because you go into the reserves. And in the reserves, whenever you're called up, it's never the right time. Either your wife is 9 months pregnant, or you're just about to take the most important exam in university, or you have an important work project. But everyone who wants to does reserves. Again, it's all voluntary. If you don't want to, you can go out of reserves. I stayed on reserves till the age of 40, which is the average age. Most people finish reserves then, although the laws are changing now due to lack of conscription by certain elements of Israel's population. They're actually raising the age of when your reserve duty finishes. But back in my day, when you were 40, you finished. My last actual service in reserves was the Second Lebanon War in 2006. So now you can work out my age if you're good at math. And so I hadn't actually served on reserves for close on 15 years when October the 7th happened.
So October the 7th happened, and we heard reports that over 150% of reservists presented themselves to their units on October 7th or immediately afterwards. Even those like yourself who were not actually required to come. You didn't receive the tzav shmone, the emergency order to be called up, because by that point you were flushed out of the system, right?
Totally, yeah. I wasn't on the computer, anything. I got the letter, the honorable discharge. Thank you very much for your service.
But yet, like so many Israelis, on October 7th, you decided that you needed to show up and to do your part. As a combat medic, you were trained, during your regular standing service or as a reservist?
Okay, so during one's regular service, everyone has a speciality. And even when I was in basic training, I was desperate to be a combat medic, but my Hebrew was awful. I only went to Jewish school for 4 years growing up. I failed the Hebrew test to get into the army and somehow managed to fudge it. Of course, most medics go join basic training. I'd only been in the army for 2 months. I'm like, you want to be a combat medic? That's nice. And I didn't go, obviously. So I spent my regular service in Givati till I became a sergeant with a different speciality. And then by then, my Hebrew was pretty good. So I drove everyone crazy and I actually did get to the medics course in my regular service, but it was after I was a sergeant. It was quite unusual because usually you go in basic training. And when they asked me, my commanding officer of the unit in Givati asked me, I was so desperate to be a combat medic. I told him for 2 reasons. One is that it's knowledge for life. It's not just an army course. It's something you can have your entire life, both as a civilian, as a parent. It's just incredibly useful knowledge. And B, that it gives one self-confidence knowing what to do in these type of situations. So I did do the medics course in my regular service in Givati, and that was my position in reserves as well. In addition, I also worked in Magen David Adom on the ambulances as a medic as well. It's one of the few military professions where as soon as you finish the military, you already have a profession. So I worked with Magen David Adom on their ambulances, and I also worked as a medic taking groups around as well before I did the tour guide course.
So when you showed up after October 7th, you actually had skills.
Like many other people, I was sitting in my house in Modi'in obviously we woke up by the siren at 6 or 6:30 in the morning, I think it was, on that Shabbat. And the news just started pouring in and we just couldn't believe it. Like the numbers of killed, of kidnapped. And we had the wave of emotions that everyone, either in Israel or people concerned about Israel, received on that day: shock, incredulity, anger, disbelief. And when we realized what those statistics were, we as in the royal we, myself, I was like, this cannot be. My very first thought is, what can I do? And that's something that's been drummed into us in the military with the Mishahu lesson. You have to be you can't say Mishu Acher, let someone else do it. You've got to get up and do it yourself. Now, there were many people of my vintage, we should say, who were also desperate to get in, but they couldn't. They're like, why do we want somebody in their 50s going to a combat infantry unit when we got all the young people? The difference in my case is I had that skill of being a combat medic. So I heard a rumor. This is how things work in Israel. A rumor. My cousin told me that she'd heard, and her brother's a Mempei now in Gaza, that there was a base somewhere in the Negev where they were looking for medical personnel, doctors, paramedics, combat medics, because they realized there was going to have to be a response to this terror attack, and they were actively recruiting. So based on the rumor, I literally, and you can't even make the story up, I went to the basement, dusted off my uniform, because everyone keeps the uniform just in case, which I hadn't worn for a decade and a half. Went down to this base, and I knew it was Bashert when I got there, because it was right next to my basic training base from Givati. So I thought, oh, this looks familiar. And I got to the main entrance, the Shin Gimel, and they said, where are your papers? And as you correctly mentioned, I didn't have any papers. I hadn't actually been called up. I didn't get a self shmon or anything. And I just, well, the next part was sense. A few minutes later, I was inside the base, let's put it that way. And then I told myself, I literally went around for about an hour and a half to different medical units saying, hi, my name is Tuvia. This is what I've done. This is my experience in Lebanon and Gaza. And post-military as well, and combat medic. I'm fit, I'm a tour guide, I'm used to running up and down mountains, and I've got the medical knowledge. Take me. And after about, I don't remember the exact time, maybe an hour and a half or so, one of the units said, you know what, you definitely trained, you've definitely got the skills, and you're quite, I think the word they used was enthusiastic. So they said, sure. And that's when the battle really began. Because they said, just go and speak to the army bureaucrats over there and they'll get you back in the system. Of course, it wasn't that simple because it's Israel. And many things have modernized and worked for the better in Israel. But the bureaucracy is still Machiavellian. It's medieval. And I went and said, hey, that unit, Palmar, Asaf, they want me to join them. They said, what's your personal number in the military? So I gave it to them, which obviously from 1948. And they put in the system that you're not even in the system, you're not on the computer, and why don't you just go home and maybe we'll call you? That's when the word tenacious comes in, because they didn't realize who exactly they were dealing with. Now, there's a very famous Israeli supergroup called Kaveret. One of their singers is called Danny Sanderson. He tells a joke, which is, I fought and I fought and I fought, and they drafted me anyway. So that's what this was like. I said, I'm not going anywhere. I've got a sleeping bag. I'm going to sleep in front of you, this office. I'm not leaving this base even. I'm not going home because that unit wants me. I have the skills. I need to be in that unit. And after literally almost 2 days of driving them mad, literally to use a medical term, getting into their veins, they said, okay, we'll put you in the system, just get out of our sight. And so I ended up joining this unit a couple of days after that, the 7th of October. In other words, no is not no, and Israel means start negotiating. Yes.
That is entirely correct. I mean, with my Israeli husband, he told me, what, no is the beginning of the conversation, not the end. What's the problem?
Correct.
Yeah. I can picture all of this because I have 3 kids in the army right now, and I hear the stories of the bureaucracy, which is just terrible. Anyone who has seen the movie Stripes from Bill and Murray, it's just like that. But Tuvia, you basically begged to put yourself into danger and into how many hundreds of days of reserve duty have you done so far?
So I'm still in the army right now. We are in northern Gaza currently, our unit, where we've been stationed more or less around the Gaza area, depending where the battles are raging. Had a break in the middle in the summer for a couple of months where I spent some time in the United States and a couple of weeks in Australia lecturing on what's happening in the military right now. But I'm still in. So we're now 13, 14 months later. So quite a long time.
And what does your family have to say about this?
Everyone knows I'm a verbrannte Zionist, as they say in Yiddish. I'm a crazy Zionist, but they understand it. This is just who I am. From a very early age, I learned that the most important lesson in Judaism is lech lecha. You've got to do it yourself. You can't just talk the talk. You have to walk the walk. So as difficult as it is, that they definitely understand that I'm uniquely qualified to be where I am. And to use religious terminology, this is a melchemet mitzvah. This is a war that we didn't start. But it's pikuach nefesh. We're literally saving lives, and I'm honored to be part of it, and I have the skill to be part of it, and I couldn't say, well, let someone else do it, and that is why, to answer your initial observation, why there was 150% turn up, because that is, people, even with the youth in Israel, they thought it was the lost generation. They're all on TikTok and WhatsApp and social media, but they really stepped up to the plate, because when push comes to shove, as Golda Meir famously said, we don't have any other options. We have nowhere else to go. So it's was forced on us, but they understand that part of that generation, without that mindset, we would not have a state.
So whereas 150% of reservists showed up on October 7th or immediately after, currently the stats are more like 75, 80% are showing up. And you know yourself how difficult it is as a reservist to maintain your business, to maintain your family life, to maintain your personal life all around. And what are you seeing in the field? Your unit is all reservists?
Yes.
So how many are like you who have just continued serving throughout?
Well, I'm one who's been serving the most, but there's people who've been doing hundreds of days. Don't think just about the reservists, think about their families at home. Just 2 days ago, I was reading an interview, The Times of Israel, about a woman whose husband has been on reserves for 250 days. And when she was asked what would she want the most, she said, what I would want the most is to have my husband at home. I can't deal with the fact that next year he might have to do 250 days more. And what I want the most is for those who are not drafted to be drafted, specifically in this case referring to the ultra-Orthodox community, who would definitely lessen that load. And quite frankly, I in my personal case, I happen to be a self-employed tour guide dealing with incoming tourism. So I don't actually have a job because there's no incoming tourism at all. However, people who are doctors in hospitals, for example, people who are self-employed and do have jobs, it is wreaking economic havoc. The estimate is the current war is costing the state of Israel approximately 1 billion shekels a day. Now, I don't know what that is in American dollars, probably about $300,000 American dollars a day, because you've got to factor in all the lost income. You've got to factor in the 80,000 internally displaced. You've got to factor in what the army is actually paying the soldiers who are serving, because Israel's insurance pays them their regular salaries. And it takes a massive toll, both economically and also emotionally, on families, on businesses. The price is not even started to be figured out right now, but it's a heavy, steep price, especially with no end in sight.
And you are obviously one of the older members of your team, I would imagine, if not the oldest. But most of the team is not quite so elderly. And a lot of them are, in fact, women, are they not?
Right. So when I was in the original army, a female combat soldier literally was an oxymoron. They just did not exist. It was not acceptable with Israeli society. However, in a very, very positive and favorable way, there has been a revolution in military culture in Israel. And currently, I'm proud to say that 1 out of 4 soldiers in our unit are females. Literally a quarter of the staff, that ranges from doctors, paramedics, combat medics, and also combat troops. So our unit is not just medical, it's combat medical, which means we actually have combat troops that have to secure the area, especially when we're triaging patients in the middle of a battlefield. The medical staff has to feel safe, and there's a combat perimeter around us. So we have females, combat military drivers, combat soldiers, doctors, paramedics, etc., etc. So correct, there are plenty male and females, and no one actually cares because it's the same as anything else in the army. We also have various backgrounds. We have people who are religious, people who are secular, people who are very left-wing, people who are very right-wing, men, women, veteran Israelis, new immigrants. I'd say about a quarter of our units are actually native Russian speakers, actually, interestingly enough. And not everyone's Jewish. We also have Christian, we have Druze in our unit. And nobody cares, because once you put that green olive uniform on, we're there for one purpose, and that is to serve and to do our best. And that, unfortunately, is what you don't see too much outside the military. I wish we could replicate it to focus on what we have in common and not what divides us as a society. As far as stamina goes, I might be physically the oldest, but thank God my work and my keep fit attitude means I don't really struggle that much.
I'm just nettling you because you're the same age as my husband, and so he's not here, so you're his proxy. But it has to take a toll because, I mean, honestly, every decade I myself notice differences in my stamina and my, just my muscle mass. And it's not as easy to do the things that I used to do so easily. How are you keeping up with that?
Well, to quote a famous physician, Rabbi Moses, the son of Maimon, otherwise known as the Rambam, he famously said, Guf bari nefesh bria, which means a healthy body is a healthy spirit.
So how do you manage when you're out in the field? Because you're not actually in Gaza all the time, right?
Right. No, what we do is we are right on the border. So, for example, the last few weeks we've literally been in a muddy field in tents, when I say intense, I mean literally intense, as well as the work we do is very intense. Surrounded by tanks, armored personnel carriers. We don't have an actual kitchen or anything like that. It's very much. Let's put it that way. We're not there for the culinary delights. It's not exactly a 2-star Michelin restaurant. So we're very lucky. In fact, this Thursday, even, I want to put a shout out. We get support from for our dietary needs from outside of the military. So this Thursday, there's a group coming from Modi'in called the Mangalistim. That's really their name. And there's a bunch of people from Chutz La'aretz, who made Aliyah. English, Australian, South Africans, and they come and literally do what we call in South Africa a braai or a barbecue, and they're still going strong. Amazingly, 13 months later, they go around to different units. There's another group that came for us once from Manana as well, also a lot of South Africans and Australians. And you have these people who come around and they're still doing these braais, these barbecues for the soldiers, and that helps us a lot, also from the morale point of view, and also to get the iron in as well, which is not quite so high on the military diet.
Wait till the Texans come, of course. But okay, let's talk a little bit more about the practical work day for you. I imagine a lot of it is hurry up and wait, and just to be in that suspended animation type feeling where you're ready to go all the time.
So that's the military in a nutshell. They say it's like 99% boredom and 1% adrenaline poisoning. You don't know when it's going to happen. Some days we can just be non-stop, literally medical evacuation after medical evacuation, non-stop. Didn't get to take our boots off, nothing. And some days, thankfully, and that's the days we prefer, the quiet days. But even during the quiet days, we're still the whole time practicing. So in other words, the medical team, the combat teams, we're always practicing the whole time. We're doing simulations, we're having classes. So we're not just like sitting down, reading the newspaper. When we're there, fully involved. And you have to be ready at all times of the day, 24/7 to go out there. And of course, once you get called up, we have to be in our vehicles and moving out. Within a couple of minutes, we're ready to go. And the most we do is to take off our military overshirt, but it's on the ambulance or in the Humvee. As we're running to, we're putting the shirt on and all our vests and our equipment. It's heavy. Like I'm walking around. You mentioned age. I'm walking around with 35 kilos of equipment on. That's about 50 pounds of equipment, which is medical and combat equipment as well. Kevlar helmets. We have ceramic plates inside our vests, and it's all heavy stuff. And we have to be ready at any given moment to go in there. This is like when we can hear the battles raging. I mean, our nightly music in our tents is drones overhead, attack helicopters, artillery, tanks, machine gun fire. We can hear it all the time. And we're not obviously the only medical unit, but when it's raging in our area and they call us, we have to go in. And the main thing, again, is speed, and speed. That's what saves lives. Minutes can save someone's life. When we get to the actual area where the wounded are, either they're brought out to us on the border, or sometimes we actually go to where the actual wounded are, and we have to sometimes triage. In other words, there's more than one. We have to quickly assess what the situation is, who's seriously wounded, who's less seriously wounded. Obviously, the seriously wounded ones have to, and there's people taking care of this. It's like a very smoothly oiled machine, because they say practice makes perfect. So we practice this even when we're not inside, how to do this and how to spread our forces out. So there's one guy, as I mentioned, on the digital pad, and he's busy writing down all the statistics. He's called the Choged. He's basically organizing all the other medics and medical team as well. And we have to react quickly. The ones who are seriously wounded, we need to, as we see how seriously they are, we have to call in the helicopters. And one of the units we work with is called Sheshesh or the 669, which is the combat military commando airborne rescue unit. It was originally formed to rescue pilots, but now it's just used generally for all the wounded. And if it's seriously wounded, head wounds or other wounds such as that, second, third degree burns, we call in the helicopters. They're on the ground. They're within minutes. They're already there. They have to be on the ground for about 20 seconds because they're not armored. They're Black Hawk helicopters. There's usually an Apache helicopter above circling them. And everything has to go super fast. If they're medium to lightly wounded, which could still be bullets and shrapnel, but not immediately life-threatening wounds, we take them in our ambulances to the hospital. Recently, because we're in the northern Gaza strip, we're going a lot to Ashkelon, to Barzilai, which is only about 25 minutes away. So again, from the moment they're wounded till they're actually in a hospital is way less than an hour. So we have to be ready at all times of day, basically.
It sounds like it really depends on the type of wound as well, because not all hospitals are equipped to do everything, such as burns. And I imagine that's a big one for you guys.
So burns, which happens from RPG or from booby traps. So Hadassah Ein Keren has got an amazing burns unit. So quite often they are taken to Hadassah Ein Keren. Also Tel Shomer as well deals very well with them. And the other two hospitals we work with are Sheba so that's Tel Shomer, but also Soroka in Beersheba and Barzilai in Ashkelon. But yeah, I mean, we've got to be basically ready at all times of day just to go in literally at the drop of a pin.
How many of you guys are there? You're one unit, Palmar. How many are within this unit, and are there other units like you?
Right, so there are different Palmarim, as they're called, and these were formed because of what happened in the previous war in 2014, because the evacuation times were too slow. And in addition to Israeli medics and medical staff, we've had observers coming from the United States Army, from NATO, from the British Army, just to see exactly how we're so efficient, how quickly we're doing it. So there are others. It's not just our unit. And usually we have each unit has about 90 soldiers in, and we have about 2/3 working and 1/3 at home. So we have to rotate around because you need time to decompress as well. Because sometimes you're just on the go for days on end, days which go into night, which go into days. It just becomes one long period. So there's usually about 1 out of 3 usually having a home leave.
And when you're at home, are you actually able to disengage, to decompress? So actually, Tuvia, before you answer whether you can decompress when you're home, you just got a phone call that you were called back early. Right. And you're a person who has volunteered most of the past year and 2 months. You get this phone call. Does your heart sink a little bit because you're not going to have another day off that you thought you were going to have?
No, the word you're looking for is I compartmentalize. And I don't sit in, people deal with things in different ways. So first of all, we do have two medical health professionals in our unit. One is a psychologist, one's a psychiatrist. And they are available to us 24/7. And also they also have a weekly mandatory meeting with everybody to discuss some of the cases which we've been through, because some of them are quite traumatic as well, especially the more seriously wounded soldiers. And I just compartmentalize. When I'm at work, I'm at work. When I'm not at work, I'm not at work.
Right. I can fully understand that as a journalist, and also the ability to put some things in a drawer and lock it up for later. But you have to wonder, later will come at some point, and some of the sights that you're seeing are so grisly that I'm sure it wouldn't even be in the Steven Spielberg film about war. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I'm saying is, first of all, kol hakavod, great that you're doing this, but I do wonder if you think about the future, the next day, when this war will end, because it will end. Won't it end?
I plead the fifth. One would like to think.
Yeah.
Yes. Of course it will, because you can't go on forever this way. I mean, our society, our economy can't handle this. It's already the longest war we've had since the War of Independence.
Yeah, and I wonder if you do put some thought into that, because what you're doing is such a holy work, but it's so inhumane in a way. It's not normal to have to stitch up a person and to stop somebody from bleeding or find lost limbs and things of that nature. And I do wonder if you think about that for the future.
Well, it affects people in different ways, this work. First of all, it's all voluntary. So if it's ever too much for anyone, you can just say, I just don't want to do it, and you leave. It's the same as a combat unit in the military. If you don't want to be there, you're out the next day. It's all voluntary. That's important to know. Even when we were doing the actual combat medics course, the middle of the course, someone left. He said, this course isn't for me. No one's going to know. You have to do it. It's all voluntary. So it does affect people in different ways. You did mention Steven Spielberg. So I have to give you an example. I was watching the film many years ago called Saving Private Ryan, and the opening is a very grisly scene of the D-Day landings in Normandy. And I was watching with a fellow combat medic, and I was watching it thinking, wow, how does he make it look so real? I was just taking out all the technical effects and how the limbs are going off and the blood and the guts. I was watching specifically how the medics in the movie were. And I thought, wow, it's incredible attention to detail. And the person I was with was literally going grey because he was having flashbacks to some of the more grisly stuff we saw. Now, we both served together, and it affected us both in very different ways. So thank God it's a blessing or a curse, but I can do that compartmentalization. That's what happens. I'm doing it because thank God I have the skills and the ability to do it. But when I'm not there, I'm not there. But I actually feel honor more than anything else.
And I think that is the most important part of any kind of, you feel called to this duty. And obviously you weren't called to the duty, you called yourself.
Well, that's a quote from Hannah Stenish, one of her famous, less-known poems. It's called the Kol Kara B'Halachti, a voice called, and I went. So I very much feel that it's a calling.
So Tuvia, thank you so much for sharing part of your calling with us today.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's What Matters Now. Please check out another installment next week. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any comments or questions about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Shalom.